My name is Queen Adesuyi. I'm a policy associate for the Drug Policy Alliance's Office of National Affairs. I'm from the Bronx. At ONA, I work on marijuana legalization from a racial justice perspective, and other collateral consequence and reentry work on the federal level. I'm here because I think one of the biggest takeaways I'm going to have tonight is the racialized disconnect when it comes to psychedelics and my experiences with that. Yeah, so I'm excited for today.
Hi everyone, my name is Ifetayo Harvey. I'm from the Drug Policy Alliance in New York City, originally from Charleston, South Carolina. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm here because I like psychedelics and I like talking to people about psychedelics. And I like feminism too, so shout out to feminism and intersectionality. Yay!
My name is Oriana Mayorga. I'm from Yonkers, New York. She, hers, and hers. She, her, hers. I am here because this is something that we've been working on for a long time, and so thank you so much to everybody here for inviting us. And I have a personal stake in this work. We'll talk about it more later, but I have been sort of dealing with dismantling the patriarchy in the psychedelic community in New York since April of this year, so longer probably. Thank you.
I also want to thank Cosmic Sister for supporting this panel and helping us put it together. Hashtag psychedelic feminism.
Amazing, thanks guys. I kind of wanted to start first of all by acknowledging the space that we're occupying right now. It's not ours, and we are privileged in that we get to take part in the community building that's being done here. But it's important that we acknowledge the brand we are occupying.
It's crackling. I can project too, so you guys are like right here. Anyways, but yeah, we do. I know a lot of us are not as we're in terms of intersections of feminism. We come across a lot of forms of oppression, but we all are still privileged enough to take part in this event, and I think that means something. So I'd just like to take time to acknowledge that. And also take time to acknowledge the communities and the cultures that we've learned this medicine, about this medicine from. Because we are blessed in that we get to learn about it now and all of the advancements and knowledge that we have. But let's not ignore that these weren't our practices to begin with, and that we are assimilating to our society slowly. So, that being said, I'd like to start the panel really. So first, let's define patriarchy in a general way. Does anyone want to take that?
Sure. So patriarchy to me is basically a system of oppression that privileges one group over another, or multiple groups over another, on the basis of gender.
Very straightforward. And let's also talk, because we want to address it from all facets, but let's talk on the war on drugs and its effects on
So the war on drugs technically was officially started in the 70s under Nixon. That was when it was first declared. But the racialization of drug use has been a thing, especially in this country, for a long time. But the Nixon administration is really when it was codified in law, and we start to see the beginnings of mass criminalization and mass incarceration. It's talked about now as a failed war on drugs, but really the way the war on drugs came about, it actually was successful in all of that it was intended to do, which was be an engine again for the filtering of Black and brown bodies into prison. So it technically didn't fail. It failed in the sense of, if folks believe the idea that the war on drugs was started to help alleviate overdose, prevent deaths, things like that, it hasn't, and it's just like exacerbated harms of potential harms of drug use / it's started actual harms with criminalizing people for what they put into their bodies. So yeah, that's just a brief history.
And while, if anyone wants to take this question, but how do you guys think that this panel is part of a larger movement to kind of attack the issues that the war on drugs has brought on? Would anyone like to take that?
Sure. I mean, just like this is actually the first woman of color panel that I've ever been on, that I've ever been invited to. Yep. That I've ever this is my first panel that I've been on with other just women of color / event, like only. So, and that's ridiculous, right? I mean, and so I think that like when I was thinking about this question, I'm thinking, this panel, this should be the norm. This shouldn't be the first and one that I've been a part of. And so like the larger work at hand is that I would like to see this in like my future children's lives as the norm, right? And we have to, unfortunately, a lot of the psychedelic societies and work are shaped, run, and upheld by like white cisgender men. And this is the way that we change that paradigm, right? Is by having these events. So that's why I think this specific panel is a part of the larger movement. But there's a lot more to that.
Yeah, basically echoing what Oriana said, this panel is also about helping folks who are into psychedelics understand how psychedelics fit into the larger context of the war on drugs. So one of our friends, Paula Khan, who's in Oaxaca, Mexico, learning about mushrooms right now, something she always says is the war on drugs is a war on healing. And she talks about how drugs, in a lot of ways, have been therapeutic for people for centuries, right? And what the war on drugs did was implement certain social norms and stigmas for certain substances versus others. So, no one, or in our society, we don't really look at caffeine as like the same as being as cocaine, or we even have variations in how we look at pharmaceutical drugs versus like quote unquote street drugs. So I think sometimes in the psychedelics world we tend to like think, oh, we're more enlightened for using psychedelics, or I'm not like a crackhead or an addict or anything like that type of stigmatizing language at others people and push you on like a higher pedestal. So I think what's really important is helping psychedelic folks understand that you can't separate the politics from these substances. Like, I think a lot of people get really uncomfortable talking about politics and what's really going on in the world and our relationship to these substances. Like, I'm gonna say, like, for most of us, these substances are part of our cultural practices. And, as a Black person, I don't really have the privilege of knowing, like, my family's like origins because of my place in society as someone who's descended from like enslaved people. So I think we need to embrace the political side of what it means to use drugs and what it means to heal from trauma by using drugs. Yeah.
So it's funny that you, I don't know if it's funny, but that you bring up that as a black woman that you don't really have access to a history of psychedelic use. When I can look back at people who are also have been here for generations and they have an understanding of their parents or grandparents or whatever's history of psychedelic use. I've actually seen parents tripping, so I mean, and like they haven't been Black. So it's funny that you say that because it's clear that there's a lack of accessibility for people of color, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about how the war on drugs, especially pertaining to psychedelics, inhibits access for people of color.
So I'm gonna answer variations of what you're saying. Okay, that's okay. So it's interesting. Access is such an interesting thing because I, for a long time, wanted to be a therapist for MAPS, and then realized that there was no one there that looked like me as a therapist, and then I probably wouldn't be helping people that look like me also. And then I realized, like, well, I was trying to think about what the issue was, and it's clearly an issue of accessibility, right? And the framework for me that sort of made a difference was like I couldn't believe that all this work was being put into helping mostly white communities, and that probably if I was a MAPS therapist right now, that would be the future for the next 10, 20 years, and that's not what I wanted to be doing. And so that is actually when it finally clicked there's an access issue is when my work towards being a therapist kind of stopped, and then now organizing around people of color has been like the forefront of the work that I want to do. Access is a really big issue. In fact, one of the things that my friend Benoit and I have been trying to figure out is like, what do we do, literally? Like, what do we non-PhD, like what do we do about making sure that people of color are going to have access to psychedelics? How do we even start doing that? It's something that we're still trying to figure out. But it's definitely, it's an issue that unfortunately I don't think is going to go away in the next 10 to 20 years.
So when we think about like the idea of the whitewashing of psychedelics, I think there's also a cultural access issue for communities of color when it comes to psychedelics because it's so deeply aligned with white culture and the stigmatization just of drug use generally. All drug users are stigmatized for their drug use, but like it gets layered based on your identity and how you experience the stigma of your drug use. So like just even considering that like communities of color face disproportionate impacts when it comes to trauma, whether it's sexual trauma, intergenerational trauma, community trauma, for folks who are from low-income areas or folks who are living in poverty, the trauma of living in poverty. Like the idea that using psychedelics could help in a healing process for folks is a possibility, and communities of color like have no access to that, like physical access, but also cultural access to psychedelics is pretty egregious, considering the only other options have been criminalization or just really intense Western medicine that might not actually work out for communities. So it's really important that folks consider the space that's being taken within the psychedelic world. I would consider myself a long-time drug user, and even myself, I'm still learning about psychedelics. So again, for other people who there are other barriers when it comes to them and ability to just use drugs and not feel unsafe because of the way the war on drugs has perpetrated and pushed stigma on communities of color, given the collateral consequences of that. Considering all of those barriers, I think it's important that we continue to do that work.
And when we're talking about that, I feel like there's also a huge issue with visibility of, like Oriana was saying, visibility of people who look like us in black and brown bodies in these spaces. Also an issue of recognition of the contributions, which is of black and brown bodies that they've made towards sex and medicine, but that's also a very common theme throughout history that we see woven through all of our advancements. I kind of wanted to get someone's take on how they feel about how larger groups are taking credit for or oppressive groups or members of people who benefit from their privilege as cis white men, things like that. Get what I mean? You guys get what I mean? Sorry guys, it's been a long day. But people like that who end up benefiting off the backs of marginalized people's work and never crediting them. Was wondering if anyone had anything to say.
Slightly different, but like same general area. So I was trying to think of an example of like the psychedelic patriarchy, like what's a clear-cut example. And a good friend of ours mentioned that Alice Walker, who's the author of The Color Purple, actually wrote a book on like her trip with ayahuasca, and like I've never heard of that until today. I know Maps certainly hasn't republished her book, and they're not selling it, and they haven't invited her to a psychedelic conference, right? But they're gun ho about Michael Pollan. I mean, oh my God, you know. And so like, there's a good example, and I thought, and that's just one, you know. Like I learned that today. So, you know, perhaps not appropriation, but I'm sure there's countless of people of color who have done remarkable work that I don't, you know, that we don't know of. And we keep centering Michael Pollan. It's incredible, actually. People texting me that like don't ever talk to me. They're like, "Are you so excited about Michael's book?" I'm like, "No, I'm not." You know, I'm really. Maybe we can talk about that too. Like, yeah. I mean, I don't have an example, but if anyone does.
I just wanted to add, when you're talking about things like erasure of people's work, I think we also need to consider things like mass incarceration and how that takes away a lot of like intellectual capital from our communities. Like, it's like a lot of people who are valuable to our communities are taken away and put into prison. Also, as someone whose father is in prison, I think we also underestimate how people's families are affected by that. So like there's trauma on like both sides, and I think that can also speak to how there's like a loss of contributions in our communities because like Black people especially are disproportionately punished for using drugs.
Piggybacking off of both first Ife's comment, because it does bring up or recenter us around the war on drugs. You're right, a lot of families are torn apart. I guess what I wanted to ask then would be, do you guys think there are any provisions or anything that we can do to kind of rectify the damage that's been done by the war on drugs on these families? And then we can come back to the topic of erasure, because I did miss that topic. But I do want to know, like, is there anything that you guys think, whether it be centered around psychs or not, that could be done to help bring justice to these people's lives?
I think a lot needs to be done. It can't just be one thing. It has to definitely be like a multi-pronged approach, you know? I think that in terms of like institutionalized psychedelics, like organizations like MAPS or Beckley or whoever, they should definitely, and they may already be doing this, I don't know, but they should definitely prioritize making those like psychedelic therapies accessible to like communities of color if they want it. I know personally one hurdle with that would be that there is so much stigma around drug use, and there's also a history of like medical institutions like abusing Black people. You know, you can look at like the Tuskegee like syphilis, and you can also look at like Black and Native American women being sterilized unknowingly. So you have to also rectify like how that relationship was just, you know, totally destroyed. And so it needs to be a lot done. First, yeah, we should get psychedelic therapy for free. Number two is definitely, I feel like just money in general. Like people like shy away from reparations, but like, hello, like I said, I'm descended from enslaved African people, and we were not paid for our labor, and that went into building the foundation of this country. And like, we never received any type of apology, any acknowledgement, you know. And that's, I don't know, that's why I can't really be surprised with what's going on today in America, because I think America has always been like a fascist country for Black people. So yeah, there's like a whole list of things that should be done for repairing the harms. But definitely money and psychedelic therapy to start would be nice.
I don't want to be policy wonk, but I guess I could talk about how we could do it on the policy level. Decriminalizing all drugs, we could start there. People shouldn't go to jail for what they put in their bodies. And on the policy level, when we decriminalize all drugs and end up legalizing marijuana and or other drugs, money from the profits of the new industries should go to communities most impacted. And there's different ways to include that on the policy level, but it needs to happen from an institutional level. It can't just be culturally accepted. It's like there has to be money appropriated to communities identified as mostly impacted by criminalization.
And what I think we realize with policy is that a lot of policy and change in policy is brought on by social movements, things like this, and I can only assume a lot of us are using psychedelics. I want to know what suggestions you guys have for people who are using psychedelics and how they're incorporating them into their everyday in a way that they can acknowledge what's been happening around them and to who it's been happening to, while still being able to enjoy the benefits of this medicine.
So, yeah, to be a conscious user, I think it's important to really always come from a place, and it's gonna sound corny, but like seriously gratitude, because I think we've kind of lost that connection with like plants and the earth, and not really having a relationship with like the things we consume. So I'm a mushroom person, so mushrooms make me feel like really close to the earth and nature and stuff. So I definitely, you know, when you do your trip, like just like kind of like praying almost, just acknowledge like thank you, like whatever you pray to, Spirit, Jesus, like Allah, whoever. Thank them for like allowing me to have this trip, and just trust their guidance on the trip, because one thing we don't really talk about is like people being afraid to use psychedelics, and I think that's a very real thing. The only reason I got into psychedelics because I was like, I feel like I was in a really desperate place, and I didn't like have anything else to turn to. Like a lot of my friends got into like Molly and stuff just because they were like partying, but I was always just like, oh, weed's enough for me. But I remember I was going through like a lot of difficult issues, and I talked to my friends about it. They're like, yeah, mushrooms. And I went to a MAPS panel at Reform, and they were talking about using LSD for terminal illness anxiety. And I was like, that's really interesting, because it's an anxiety. I was dealing with a lot of anxiety too, so I was like, okay, well, maybe I should try this. And my friends just gave me the rundown of mushrooms. Like, first time, definitely, I feel weird like saying this on mic, because I'm like, but y'all already know, right? Like, you know. First time, like, I wouldn't recommend taking more than like 3 or 4 grams. So you're gonna vomit. I vomit all the time. Like, it's okay. It's part of the purging process. It's like a cleansing. It's great. Also, be with someone who you trust and feel truly comfortable around. I've tripped with people who I kind of sort of know, and luckily it was fine. But I think for your first time, like, definitely be with someone you're like comfortable with, and be in a place that you're like familiar with. I personally think it would be good to have like a person who's sober around you. Just, yeah, and also be mindful if you're on other medications like antidepressants, whatever. Some of those make you wreck. I've had friends have like schizophrenic episodes on like LSD, and just, I'm a person who has mental health needs, so definitely like know yourself enough to like to make a wise decision. Let's see. And yeah, have a good time. Try not to freak out too much. I think with mushrooms especially, they're good for you to process things like very difficult, emotional, traumatic experiences. So don't shy away from that. You have to really just like accept it and like face it, because the more you run away from it, the like bigger it feels to you. And if you're with someone who's safe, you can just tell them what you're thinking about, and you'll just feel 10 times better. It'll just feel like a weight lifted off your chest. So don't run away from the bad. It's scary, but you just have to embrace it.
So, and then I was also thinking, like, in terms of, because about being a conscious user, like, I don't have a solution to the issue, but I roll my eyes at like all the Brooklyn ayahuasca like hammocks and people that are doing it in their apartments and charging $50 for admission. Like, it's appropriation in its finest form, and I think it's really lame. And I don't have a suggestion. Like, what should you do? Should you go to like Peru and like further harm those communities? Like, I don't know what the answer is, but I think being mindful of your set and setting and like where the money is going to when you take part in these rituals, right? And you're paying a shaman. All the Brooklyn shamans are out there. Yeah.
I would just think culturally and socially we should push. I want to like just to, piggyback on the mental health stuff that Ife was bringing up. I think when it comes to dealing with folks who've dealt with trauma or who may have PTSD, a lot of times that conversation is dominated by patriarchal kind of sense too, because it's normally PTSD and PTSD treatment is normally associated with veterans, and typically they're usually talking about male veterans suffering from PTSD. But again, PTSD is something that is experienced by so many different people within different communities for different reasons. So socially pushing back against the fact that like you may not only experience PTSD because you are someone in the military. PTSD has many different faces. So I think pushing back on that.
Thanks. Yeah, I've had experiences in terms of patriarchy, and patriarchy leads into racial relations. But personally, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Belle Isle. I just want to like drop a little story real quick because I feel like it kind of has something. It relates to culture and being sensitive as a conscious user. But a friend suggested that we trip at Belle Isle, to help cleanse the space. Belle Isle was a space used by the Confederacy during the Civil War in Richmond, Virginia, to murder and torture Union soldiers fighting against slavery in their own way. And also the murder of a lot of black people, a lot of slaves who were inducted into a war they didn't ask for. And it was with my partner who's white and a friend who's white, and genuinely people having their hearts in the best places, I know. But thinking about tripping, consuming mushrooms in that space, and I'm not even a black person who's affected in the way that Ife is by being a descendant of enslaved Africans, but having a different relationship with slavery within my people, and having to sit there and reconcile it. It's something that, while people's hearts were in the right place, also recognize that that's a kind of like healing that I don't think can happen with like two friends at the river. That's a lot of pain that underscores almost every facet of someone's existence, and to ask them to be open in that space and to try and even process it is difficult, let alone heal through it. It's all love, but definitely taking that into consideration would be something I would consider being a conscious psych user. So I think now we can kind of come back into the topic of erasure, especially because we're talking about people's experiences kind of being overlooked. We know of a researcher named Catherine McLean, right? Did I say that right? Cool. McLean. Anyways, she's an amazing researcher, worked with Johns Hopkins, and was recently put in, or her research was recently put into Peter, is his last name really easy? Thiel. Okay. Peter Thiel. And I was hoping someone on the panel could kind of delve into Rachel's contributions and what exactly that was for her, and what happened with her with Peter Thiel.
None of us know. Okay. I mean, I don't think any of us really know. Unfortunately, know that much. Do you know much about it? No.
Just a little bit.
You probably know more than all of us about this. We know. I know about. I mean, I know about the lack of POC and Michael Collins.
Okay. So.
I mean, it's basically, from what I remember, it's I didn't expect Michael Pollan to actually like give any. Sure, Michael Pollan is a famous author because the New York Times was talking about his book about psychedelics. So people are really excited that he's normalizing the work and the community. And I didn't expect him to quote any women or people of color in his book, and he didn't. That I'm aware of. And Catherine McLean actually was somebody who brought this to light. I had heard about it through her, and I don't have like a lot of details on it, but she's a great person to contact. She's on Facebook, and she made a post about it, and it was actually, I think, so remarkable that it got back to Michael Pollan at in California, like another panel like this, like a small. And I know he said something to the effect that he acknowledged, right, that he had made a mistake, and but I don't know more about it.
Also coming up tomorrow is Maria Sabina Day, who is also a woman of color who introduced, as Vin said, the population, the entire U.S. population, basically, to psychedelics. And she's the reason that you are here today and know anything about what we're talking about. So props go to her. Would anyone like to open up about her?
So Maria Sabina, she's from Huautla Jimenez in Oaxaca, Mexico. It's like one of the southern provinces of Mexico, and she came, she's called like a curandera. Basically, she's like a healer, and her life story is really, really interesting, but the reason why we know her name is because, what's his name, Gordon Wesson, he went down to Mexico and kind of stumbled upon / forced himself into their community and like was looking for the mushroom ceremonies. So Maria Sabina agreed to it because that's what healers do, and he was just like, whoa, you know, and went back to America and told everyone about the mushrooms, and like he was well connected to like folks in Hollywood and like other wealthy people, so they would like make trips down there, and it became more and more popularized. Kind of what we're seeing like with the ayahuasca tourism in Peru and Colombia and Ecuador, and so that's basically what a lot of the psychedelic community knows about Maria Sabina. But I've been working with some folks who have connected me with one of the stewards of her archive in Oaxaca, and it's really interesting what I've been learning about her life. She was born in like the 1800s and then married when she was like 15 or something in an arranged marriage. Her husband was like abusive towards her. He died, and then she got more into the mushrooms and kind of, in a way, healed herself from that abusive relationship. And later on, that's when she met the Gordon Wesson guy. But as she became more popular, people treated her as an object of research. And I think a lot of people don't like to talk about this because it's uncomfortable, but it was actually, these type of practices were really common in that time period, especially in the US. I had said about the syphilis with the Tuskegee Airmen. So she was treated as an object, and the guy who I've been working with, his name is Indy Garcia. He has like all the archives, research papers that these Americans have done on Maria Sabina. And basically they experimented on her with like different drugs, like Albert Hoffman, he experimented on her with LSD, and they just like totally disrespected her humanity as a person. And she actually died really like impoverished, and like someone did a film on her called Mujeres Espiritu, and apparently she didn't get any money for that film at all. So these people just like took from her, and didn't really cherish the cultural tradition and the sacredness around their mushroom ceremonies. But her birthday's tomorrow, and down in Oaxaca, Mexico, to this day, they still do like a festival for her. So two of our friends, Yolanda and Paul, are down there right now with Inti, and they're just hiking, journeying, learning. We're actually helping do a fundraiser to rescue her archive, because there's a lot of old materials. If you know anything about archiving, it's very almost like science. It's like a science almost, how you have to take care of papers and other materials. So we're fundraising to get a computer and a scanner down there, and hopefully some other materials later on. So if you're interested in that, let me know, and I can point you in the right direction.
So we're talking about a lot of women in this space, and we're talking about their importance in it, but I think women are femme bodies, or bodies who are targets of sexual assault, don't always feel comfortable being in psychedelic spaces because they are so male-dominated. And to be so vulnerable in a space that you're not comfortable in around people who hold a social power over you or some type of social hierarchy can be difficult. But it's especially difficult because it can be a noise chamber for those people, in that they believe that they're already so enlightened, as you guys said, that they don't need to take into consideration how they could possibly be problematic, or how they could be crossing lines in terms of consent or making bodies feel uncomfortable. Consent in psychedelic spaces is something that isn't talked about very frequently, if ever. And I kind of want to get people's points and takes on what consent and their experiences on what experiences on consent in psychedelic spaces, or the lack thereof.
I'll just say something really quickly. I think it's become the norm in psychedelic spaces to approach people for sex under the influence of psychedelics, or try to subdue people with psychedelics, and I just want to say that's fucked up, and you shouldn't do that. So yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So when we're talking about consent, right, like enthusiastic consent would be the best thing, right? An affirmative yes, affirmative consent. And it's really hard to do that when you're drunk, and it's really hard to do that when you're under the influence of drugs. And so, like, it would be great if all people, not the conversation about sex should happen prior to the taking the drug, right? Especially if you're a therapist, I think. And how many people here know about the recent removal of Dr. Neil Goldsmith from Horizons? No? Interesting. So Horizons is this annual conference that happens once a year in New York City. It's like, at least for, I don't know if you feel this way, but for me, it's like, it's always been like my favorite weekend of the year. It's like anybody's in the research community or in the advocacy community like attends this thing. It's like, it's been happening for about 11 years now. And so Dr. Neil Goldsmith is was on the board and was removed from the board because of accusations of sexual misconduct, right? And we know that we have Harvey Weinsteins in every industry. This is not it's not particularly set just to Hollywood. And sexual assault, I'm going to assume that around substances, is probably a lot higher. And so we know that they're not often reported or spoken about. They're underreported, rather. And so I can't even imagine this community, right, what that would look like. Unfortunately, I do. And one of the things that I recently led in April was direct action, which we there are people in this room that helped chant out to men who were sexually violent towards women of color in our community, and the community did not like that. They were really bent out of shape. You know, all these like peace-loving, enlightened folks wanted us to hug it out and sit and talk about it and like, come on, give them the space to do that. And it's like, no, your time's up. Actually, like, how do you think it feels to be violated? Right? This is not the space for you to speak about what you did or why it was okay or consented to. This is not it. And then people were, or at least in my experience, have been really super excited about the process in which Dr. Neil Goldsmith was removed because it was legal and it was procedural, and at least they went to an attorney and they got enough survivors' accounts, and it's all like quantified and qualified for everybody to like feel like, okay, well then he must have done something bad, right? I mean, a law firm got involved, and nobody was shouting and yelling in a room. And meanwhile, I led both of those efforts. I led the direct action and I led the work with the lawyer, with the law firm. And the community has been so bent out of shape about the direct action. And yet people are applauding this procedural thing that happened. And I'm the same person that did both, right? It's really interesting how our community, at least in New York City, bless you, is just, they don't like protests. They don't like, there's, time and a place for these things. And yeah, I don't know, I have a lot to say about it, but as a survivor of sexual assault, like, I am not going to allow people to be in a room with like people that are unsafe. It doesn't matter if they're people of color or not, like, I will not stand for that. And it's interesting to see how like we're starting to see the Me Too effect rippling in our community in New York City. People are not happy.
Yeah, I just want to respond to what you said about how people reacted towards the thing with Neil versus the disruption protests. And I think that has a lot to do with people's expectations of what survivorhood or survivor whatever should look like. I think that people expect, they'll have sympathy for a certain type of survivor. You can't be an angry survivor, you can't be a depressed, like, suicidal survivor, you can't, be emotionally volatile or angry about what happened to you. You have to, like, look a certain way and mourn and grieve in private, where it's, like, convenient for everyone. And by bringing these things to the light, you're making people have to, like, face how they're complicit in upholding folks who do harm to people, especially people who are less privileged than they are. Women.
Just want to like also add to that is that actually Ife mentioned this the other day, but it's something that I know to be true. Like, women unfortunately uphold like patriarchy all the time, and just like I wish I had like a training manual or like a mentor or like somebody to give me some tips on like how to have done my direct action, because because these two men were people of color, right? I was crossing that intersect of like, it would have been a lot easier if they were like, cisgender white men, I think, calling them out. And so, coming after two people that are people of color when there's so few of us that are, in this space leading the work was very challenging, has been very challenging. And I just would like everybody to just be very mindful of who we are. Like, when you're taking drugs, who we're taking drugs with. Like, if somebody has a reputation that is questionable, it would be wise, I think, to believe the women. Something that I'm noticing is I cannot believe how many people wanted to know exactly what happened to me and to my friend, and when it happened, and how it happened, and was it really like that? Like, they really want to quantify and qualify our experiences to see if these guys are really bad guys, And it's been very painful to think that in this really beautiful community that I've been so in love with since I was 19, we are upholding the same systems that continuously oppress our people and women.
I want to leave time for Q&As, so we're going to try and leave about 20 to 30 minutes left for you guys to have Q&As. It is 5:40, but I think it'll be okay if we go over just a bit. Okay, cool. But we won't stay for too long. So I guess the next question I wanted to ask was, what can we do as a community to help protect and make sure that victims of sexual violence feel safe in our communities?
I think one of the most important things is just like creating space for folks who've been harmed, just so they, you know, there's different ways you can hold space for people. That can be active listening, that can be doing some type of activity with them, just holding space. But we can also be more intentional about creating space and who's in our spaces. Like, we haven't had a lot of panels like this. So doing more of these panels, having more of these conversations, supporting people in sharing their story if they choose to. Something I did in college a lot was supporting other people of color at a predominantly white college, and how like that can be really hard. So we did like writing as healing, and we would like meet once or twice a month and like just write in different ways and express ourselves in whichever way we felt comfortable. So I think being intentional about creating healing spaces, like survivors need healing spaces. I think part of the violence of sexual assault or any form of sexual violence is that it's meant to outcast you, it's meant to isolate you on both like a physical and a mental level, right? Because you're traumatized. It's hard for you to feel connected to your body and other people. And if you are afraid that your abuser, whoever is going to be at an event, because people aren't supporting you, then that's also isolates you from your own community. You have to walk around being afraid, like, oh, are they going to be there? Are they going to be watching me? You know, I think we really need to create intentional safe spaces for folks who are survivors.
I would also say, like, believe the survivors, like, it should go without saying, but, like, maybe we need to hear it a lot more, like, just believing them, and would be, I think, a good place to start, and not being afraid to, like, I'd say create safe spaces, for sure, believing people who are saying that they have been, a victim or survivor of sexual violence, and then, like, advocacy, right? So, like, advocacy doesn't just look like liking my Facebook post, but it's helpful. Sometimes I've asked people to do that, but it also looks like, I think, and maybe this is like a little too radical, but like I'm not going to build with some people. Like I'm just not going to build with certain people, and that's just that. I'm not going to work with them. I'm not going to harm them, right? I'm not going to deliberately take time to work with them if I know that they are people who have harmed other people. It's not my thing. And people that work with people that harm other people are really questionable to me. Really questionable, and it sucks because there's a lot of those people in our community. And you call in some things and you call out other things. I think that there is like, unfortunately, this organizing mentality that like it's a good thing to be a martyr. It's not fun. It's not an enjoyable thing. I don't think that we need to be martyrs to do this work. But I do think that like if you are in a position of power and you are working with people that are harming other people, like your time's gonna come, I'll make sure of it.
On the day-to-day level, I think it's important to consider how important it is to really invest in bystander intervention. So just considering, even if you don't know somebody, if you're at an event, if you're at a party, if you're in a situation where you notice that someone needs help, like as much as you can, just try to chip in whatever way it is. Like even if the situation is awkward, it's better to be awkward than to not have stepped in a way that you could have. So like drugs are a neutral thing. The way they're used and the way folks are stigmatized because of it is really where the harm comes from. So if you see someone like feeding someone too much liquor or there's too much going on in a situation and a person seems to be out of control, like there's a power dynamic off when it comes to the drug use, like trying to do what you can to like step in or like evaluate what this person may need. So they might actually just be okay, like they might be with someone they trust, but like it's nice to be able to try to intervene when we can.
Before we go to Q&A, always end on a happy note. How do you guys think that psychedelics can help heal and end depression?
I mean, I'm still learning about psychedelics, and because I'm coming into it from a space where I'm like reading about it and I'm listening to people's experiences about it, I'm learning about the ways that they can be applicable to communities that I feel like I identify with that may not be like in harmony with psychedelic communities that already exist. But I see the expansion of access to psychedelics as a really important, cool tool, even if it's not all in the same space. I think psychedelic use across different communities, across different brethrens is really important.
I think of psychedelics as like a tool. So I think psychedelics can work for some people and maybe not so much for others. But in terms, I think psychedelics can foster healing in people in different ways. And I think our world needs a lot of that. Like, we just need as much healing and as much love as possible because, I don't know, I always think about it how, like Amna said, we are on stolen land and we're like, you know, there's just been a lot of bloodshed in the US and that makes it hard for us to like even understand why we are where we are today. So yeah, I just think psychedelics are a tool to help people heal. If they work for you, great. But I think sometimes psychedelic people can get like too ahead of themselves and be like, it's for everyone, like it's gonna work for everyone. Like, I think it can work for some people, but it's not, there's like a lot of work to be done outside of that. And that's why I think like integration is important too, and connecting with community and unpacking these experiences.
My drug of choice is MDMA, and it's the only, I know it's arguable, but I consider it a hallucinogen. I've taken it hallucinated, which means I took too much, but it is my drug of choice, but it's the only hallucinogen that I've taken. So I've not done anything else yet. And I struggle with anxiety, not depression, and what I can say is that MDMA is one of the, definitely saved my life when I was 19. It expedited a lot of healing from the sexual assault that I had experienced in college, and it continues to be this like very important, sacred thing that I get to do once every 4 months, if that, sometimes twice, just twice a year. But anyway, it has fostered a lot of healing for me, and I think like every time that I use it, I'm just like, oh my God, this is the reason why I want to do this work, because I want other people who have survived this trauma to have this experience, to be able to feel this. And so access is critical, integration circles are critical. And I would say that like, along with healing people, a lot of psychedelic people get into the arts, like look where we are, and like that is so healing I think for any mental, health stuff. So that's it.